the rights frame, to incorporate that into the definition of socioeconomic rights, I think we would make a huge leap forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm taking notes at the same time. Excellent points there. Sarita, what would you do as your one thing?
Many interesting things that have been said, so I'm not going to repeat all of them, despite, of course, I share all of them, and I think those are really important priorities. I would say the following: we need really a change in mindset. We notice that, for example, when people with disability issues or all the person issues that are addressed are mostly perceived as something which is related to a very specific group of people, while in fact the data say another story, because 15% of people all over the world have a disability, which
and also ETS for city development of cities in a sustainable way in developing countries. Greg, you spoke about that initially. Is this an expanding area of finance opportunity?
Diane, it's a hugely expanding area, and the answer to the question is we can and we must. And what is very important, I think, is to understand that sustainable finance is now becoming the preferred means for the major capital market players. It's sovereign wealth funds, institutional finance, pension funds, insurance companies, and others. Increasingly, consumer pressure as well as progressive regulation is forcing them to allocate their capital to green financing. And then commercial banks like HSBC, but also publicly backed banks like the AIIB, the African Development Bank, the IDB, and others increasingly have to do this. So I think that we're at the beginning of a new chapter in green financing, green bonds, sustainable bonds, ESG bonds, and others. What we all have to do is learn how to use them. And to pick up the challenge that I think Edgar has laid in this conversation extremely well, we have to make big money work at the local level. And that means that there's quite a lot of work to be done to aggregate initiatives of one kind or another, to make them scalable so that big capital can play a part. But increasingly also, I expect to see all sorts of subnational governments, regional, provincial, state governments gaining access to this kind of green financing to do some of the things that we've been talking about on the call. So we can and we must. The capital is there, the appetite is there. We have to build a system that delivers the capital both locally as well as on the big ticket items. Much easier to deliver green finance to large infrastructure than it is to deliver it to the kind of local infrastructure that Edgar's reminded us is so important.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you, Greg. The next question is around, are there any governance evaluation models or governance indicators used by governments or international organisations for accessible and inclusive urban developments? Does anybody on the panel want to answer that one? So are there governance evaluation models or indicators?
Diane, I suspect that Edgar's the right person to answer this question because he's done a lot of work in this space. So I think we should leave it to him.
Excellent, Edgar.
Thanks, Greg. So just to know that Greg and I've worked together in the past for quite a while. So that's why he feels at liberty to usurp your role and tell me to speak. Of course, there are. In fact, it's a whole industry. And again, sort of just with my tendency, because the consulting firms sell models to them, that they've got to create targets, indicators, and then these elaborate monitoring systems with digital backends and dashboards and so forth, that is going to solve the governance deficit. I am not convinced at all. And in fact, it's just been an area where I think that there's been profiteering by consultancy firms and not the deepening of democracy. So I'm not sure whether that is helpful, but that is certainly my experience. Thanks.
Thank you, Edgar. I think the next question fits into a similar frame between those two. A question saying financing is framed by assessing risk and returns on investment, whereas transformational change requires long-term investment. This goes against both political and financial short-termism. What does the panel suggest are options to address this challenge? There is always that tension of long-term planning and short-term action and elections. So would anybody from the panel like to provide an answer to that question? Edgar, I think if you're speaking, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. I'm happy to jump in and others can pick up. This is absolutely critical, their plan for the term of office. But you then need a category of expenditure that is about transforming the operating system of the city. These are the things like the energy transition or the mobility transition and so forth. And you need about roughly, you can't really spend more than 10 to 15% of your CapEx budget. And so it is not the whole budget. So you can then have a third category, which is the routine operations of a city, which of course also requires a long-term view, but really the critical question is universal access, is an adequate level of investment in repair and maintenance so that you can extend the lifespan of assets as long as possible. And thirdly, making sure that you've got a fiscal model that allows for redistribution so that everyone can get access to these services. So these are different kinds of investments, and they create the opportunity to help us to do both the short term, the medium term, and the long term. But you have to be able to package the different components of the investment ask for different markets and for different institutional arrangements. And that requires quite a nimble capacity, which is often not, readily available within your traditional public finance systems. And so there's again a need to build new kinds of capability and to maybe network some of this expertise and new modes of working across municipalities, which of course UN Habitat is very well placed to do. Thanks.
Diane, may I just add a little bit there, because I agree entirely with what Edgar just said. I also agree with the premise of the question, that if you like, there is a tension between the short-term imperatives of political mandates that are 3 to 4 years, and as Edgar rightly says, the transformational requirements in big city systems, which could take 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, in some cases even more than that years. So there is a role, I think, here, alongside Edgar's radical transparency, also for some kind of complementary civic leadership in cities, where you have proactive private sector institutions, but also civic institutions like universities, other kinds of organizations, to try to help city governments and indeed state and national governments stay on track with long-term imperatives, even in the middle of short-term mandates. And there are many different ways around the world in which this kind of complementary governance can emerge. But it seems to me this is absolutely critical to, as it were, rewarding politicians for the contribution they've made to long-term agendas while they're in office, not just rewarding them for what they do that has a short-term, as it were, magnification. And I think this is absolutely critical to shifting more.
You said, as we opened, the importance of health in terms of functioning of cities. It is thinking about things in a much more collective and inclusive way, isn't it? I'm conscious, though, of the time and the role of the second panel. Can I just do a quick run through each of our panel members for your final thoughts? Henry, can I start with you?
Okay, thank you, Diane. Let me just say sometimes what we do requires going back to the basics. Because the basic question that we should all ask ourselves is, yes, we want to have resilient and sustainable cities, but for we put the who at the center of what we are doing, that will create a pathway where we are going to eliminate some of the challenges that we have been seeing over the past few weeks. For example, the last issue that has been highlighted about the short-term political agendas and what have you. If indeed we do have the city's development detached from the political leadership, where the people in the cities take ownership and leadership over what needs to be done in the short term and long term, obviously that is going to give power to them to be able to chart the way forward for what they want to see for their own cities. So for me, it's about, yes, we need the money, and there's no question about it. But sometimes, speaking in the context of African cities, sometimes it's not about the money, but it's about what you think moving forward. What vision do you have for your people? So I think if we step back and take what is the vision that we want to take for our people moving forward, and then mobilizing the finances to take us the next mile, instead of the monies driving what should be done, because that is where now we fall into the trap of the politicians hijacking the agenda. So maybe very briefly, let me stop there and thank you.
To operate, understanding the basis for the new social contract is critical to having a sustainable business model for the future. So to answer the primary question in the chat, why would businesses do these things? They would do them because they want to still be in business in 50 years' time, and they want to recognize that the social contract around the world is changing. The license to operate is going to be reformed and revised, and they need to be ready for that.
It certainly is changing. Thank you, Greg. Edgar, can I turn to you?
Sure. Thank you. I guess for me, the issue is when we ask ourselves about what does working together to build sustainable cities and communities mean, we've got to step into the future and work back. We've got to recognize that if we're looking at a net zero world by 2050, and thankfully a number of significant countries have now signed up to that, so it seems as if there is increasingly sufficient momentum. We've got to recognize that the global economy is going to be different. The nature of community is going to be fundamentally altered. And the motivations of young people today is what is going to carry us there. So how do we really engage with new concepts around the solidarity economy, circular economy, the possibility of digital platforms, to begin to understand how do we connect these potentialities, these directional changes, to the fundamental questions of economic inclusion and incorporation through work and through a sense of purpose and entrepreneurship. And I would venture to say that, it's still very early days. We don't have a very sophisticated language or set of frameworks to really understand what this transition means. Thank you.
Excellent. Wish we had more time to talk. Sarita, your final thoughts?
Yes, I think something, it is very important with respect to COVID-19 pandemic to recognize something, that the future is very likely, unfortunately, to be pandemic. This is in all the report from WHO since years, unfortunately, despite we were very late in recognizing the coming of this pandemic. And so it is very important to understand that we have to incorporate a new dimension into the planning for inclusion and for the building of inclusive and sustainable cities, which is precisely pandemic preparedness. And recognizing that implies that borrowing from the toolkit of all the tools that in the new urban agenda, etc., plays us in a comparative advantage, precisely because
national governments, and the private sector, especially the financial institutions that had a strong commitment and that had a very strong interest to be part of this process. So key messages, key lessons learned from that process is it's truly understanding what are the different incentives that the different groups have to come together. As it was mentioned earlier, I believe by Edgar, it's not a very simple process. It's not a, while there might be a common goal, a common sense of direction that brings the different groups together, they're all coming with very different ideas and very sets of incentives what we need to be able to understand. So the municipalities in this particular case had a very strong incentive for reducing pollution, reducing the amount of dust particles in the environment. National governments had a very strong incentives around reduction of CO2 emissions. Communities, residents, homeowner associations around energy savings, around comfort levels, improved health conditions. Of course, the private sector, while they had a social responsibility component to why they were part of this process, they also had a very strong commercial incentive because they felt an opportunity for their client base to increase. So understanding the different incentives of all these different groups that were coming to the table was very important. And furthermore, the issue also of then how do we are able to provide different types of knowledge and resources to these different groups for them to come to the table on equal terms. That's a second key element of supporting and facilitating these partnerships and these processes of dialogue and negotiation. What are the resources? What is the knowledge that these different groups could come to that respond to those incentives, but as well as allow them to communicate, that allow them to negotiate in ways that are appropriate. And then a third element that I believe is important when we're talking about this type of partnerships, it's the ability to come up with demonstration projects. And I think that was discussed also on the previous panels, the ability to, while there might be long-term issues that these particular groups are trying to address, and a lot of the solutions might be tied to policy, might be tied to legislation, to the creation or the development of long-term investment planning. There needs to be some initial projects, some quick wins that are able to get everybody going, that are able to keep the partnership and the partners motivated, and that we're able to demonstrate that these solutions are feasible. So the concept of demonstration projects is something that throughout my experience has become quite critical as we work on facilitating partnerships and dialogue. And also important in this process is the concept of facilitation, to have a neutral entity, a neutral role that can ensure that bring these different groups together and that can then promote transparency, which was also a concept that was brought earlier, transparency that can broker potential areas of conflict. And this is an area that can be done by technical organizations, a role that can be played by universities or by other entities, which I think is quite important. And I see the moderator, so I don't know if I'm okay with my time.
That's okay. We've combined the first couple of questions each time, so that makes sense. Thank you, Susanna. Now, if I can turn to Thomas Kerr. Mr. Thomas Kerr is the Publications Coordinator for the Asia Coalition for Housing Rights in Thailand. Thomas, welcome. Thomas, are you with us? Just while we're sorting out Thomas's access, perhaps if I can instead turn to Huizes, a film director from the United States. Are you with us?
Yes.
Excellent. Welcome.
How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for stepping in quickly.
Thank you, Diane. Yes, it's Jesus. I would love to speak on safety.
Thank you.
Safety is essential in valuing communities and cities. Safe communities and cities are indeed thriving communities and cities. Today marks the end of the first annual 40 Days Safer Cities Challenge, a period that has seen communities and cities showcase innovations that are transforming neighborhoods across the world using their social capital through the arts and culture. These are the new indicators, like the Afro Reggae group in Rio de Janeiro, the Sitbigwa Art Center in Johannesburg, and the SICK Social Impact Content Film School in New York, which I founded with the intention of healing humanity one voice at a time. The commonality and key message within all of the participants of the Safer Cities Challenge is how we look at young people, not as problems to be managed, but rather as resources and assets to be developed. It is not a cliche that children are our future, it is a fact. I'm evidence of that as I've been a perpetrator of crime, a victim of crime, and now a preventer of crime. As a youth, I was shot at 22 times in a horrific murder attempt, but I put down a gun and picked up a camera to give myself a career and world of opportunities that now allows me the privilege to help and inspire others. I've been honored by the President of the United States, Barack Obama, as a champion of change, along with many other accolades. But imagine if I kept a gun in my hand and repeated that cycle of violence. I wouldn't have saved so many other people, inspired millions, or had the honor of being here today. Examples like mine have worked to positively change relationships between communities and cities, with the police towards the co-production of Safety for All. This week in Poughkeepsie, New York, we'll be announcing another partnership with Mayor Rollison and other community agencies for a collaborative effort to end gun violence with the power of film. I believe we need to work closer with the 25 years of working practices of the UN Habitat Safer Cities program and the global network on safer cities, of which I'm extremely honored and proud to be a part of. We must scale up the value of communities and cities through the principle of co-creation and co-production of safety for all. Valuing communities and cities also enables them to be the agents of change, investing in community, self-driven safety monitoring, understanding that there's not one solution for all. At the heart of this is our attitudinal change to decriminalize stigmatized neighborhoods and subcultures in the face of high crime and violence, allowing them to have an equal voice and say in the local governance of safety. A prime example is valuing graffiti and hip hop as art and not vandalism. Many cities criminalize these practices as vandalism instead of investing in these creative expressions as art. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you, Hasways. I was immediately struck with the importance there of the value of culture and how important that is to creating a sense of place and a sense of community, and you've articulated that so beautifully. So thank you for that. Can I just check if our final panel speaker in this session is with us now? Thomas, are you connected? I know you're online, I just can't quite hear you or see you yet.
Oh gosh.
There you go.
It's working?
I can hear you.
Okay. Do you have a picture? You
No,
don't need to see my face. It's not that exciting.
So Thomas, you're right to speak, if I can hand over to you.
Okay. Is it possible to share the screen, or is that going to be too tricky?
Leon, in the background, is that possible?
I see a share button, but it's
Yes, it's possible. I've made you a presenter, so you should be able to share your screen.
okay. Great. Can everyone see the slide, COVID-19?
Yes.
Okay. I'm working with the Asian Coalition for Housing Rights in Bangkok, and we have been we mostly focused on housing and urban poor, urban poverty, issues of access to housing and land and that sort of thing. But when the virus came, we were all just thrown for a loop, and there's been real suffering in Asia, and we've tried to sort of figure out how to deal with the crisis and how to make use of it. So let's see. Oops. It's bad, of course. I don't need to tell you all it's bad, the situation here. The people who are the poorest have been hit the hardest, and it's not so far. It's not so much a health problem, but it's an employment and economic problem. People have lost jobs. They have no safety net, no savings, and a lot of people who live in urban poor communities, they have to earn every day in order to eat. So people don't have food to eat. They don't have they're not able to survive. It's really, really a bad situation. And community federations and networks and community organizations in cities around Asia are getting very active to try to deal with these problems. And for the most part, they're on their own, or they have a little bit of support from their support NGOs, or they have a little bit of support from local governments, but not much. For the most part, they're just kind of doing what they can. And for example, in Bangladesh, there are women's federations in Dhaka, there are networks of Dalit communities and waste pickers who have been monitoring food prices, setting up community gardens, working with local government agencies to channel aid to the people who need it rather than to the people who are just on some list somewhere. They've worked with some community architects to develop community quarantine guidelines. They've distributed information about viruses, or hygiene and virus control. In India, the Mahila Milan NSDF Alliance in Bombay which reaches about 30,000 families in the city, has been working also with government to channel food aid to people who would otherwise be missed. They've gathered donations and distributed food and have set up food banks for people who are really in great need, making masks and sanitizing gel. In Indonesia, a couple of networks in Jakarta, the community network has been collecting data on community needs and raising funds to buy food and distribute it to people who are unemployed and hungry. They've set up community quarantine systems where when people get the virus, they can stay in their house, but others in the community will bring them food and look after their children and that sort of thing. They've also started making a mix that makes a traditional drink that makes builds up people's immune systems. In Myanmar, the Women's Savings Network in Yangon has been setting up hand washing stations, teaching women to keep in touch by Zoom and by phone during the lockdown, raising funds to distribute food packs, making masks, hand washing stations, setting up also community quarantines during lockdown when people can't leave. And in Sri Lanka, the Women's Bank, which is a national network of women's savings groups, very, very big, with 100,000 members in all 25 districts of the country. They've also been dealing with the crisis in their own way, suspending loan repayments, distributing food aid, working with local government to channel aid to people who need it, boosting lending to help families get over the crisis. But Thailand is the glorious exception to this list, because Thailand is the country which has a huge and overlapping environment of community networks that do a lot of things, and it's supported by a government institution called CODI. CODI exists to support the community-driven development in Thailand on many fronts, especially housing, especially in housing insurance, welfare programs. And community networks are in charge of all these things, and they're supported with funds and technical support from CODI. So it's quite unusual in Asia. And the community health volunteers, as an example, that they're supported by the government, but they work directly in communities. They reach everyone, both rural and urban communities. very effective system but in Thailand, the health crisis has not been the main aspect of the COVID crisis. It's mostly been economic. And so people have lost jobs. They don't have income. They're not able to earn and to buy food, especially the urban communities. And so there's been a lot of distribution of food packages by the urban community networks around the country. Some of them have been linking with rural networks to get rice and vegetables at cost for distributing in their food packages. They survey and use their networks to figure out who needs what and then make sure those people get what they need. They set up these food donation cupboards where people can leave food and then people who are hungry can come and help themselves. There have been lots and lots of community kitchens set up in 22 districts in Bangkok and many of the provincial cities. And the government, through CODI, provides a budget of $1 per meal to support this program. And so far, 250,000 meals have been cooked by 71 community kitchens. And these meals are going to people who are really, really in a bad situation and don't have much to eat. They're not being reached by the formal aid systems that are part of the government response to COVID. And community gardens, another thing which has been really flourishing in Thailand the last few years, but which has gotten a huge boost with the COVID crisis because people suddenly need to eat and they can't buy food. And so they're starting to raise it in small pots, in small pieces of land. They borrow land from temples or from the government to set up community gardens. It's a big part of the community agenda now in Thailand. Over 100 cities now have communities with some kind of community gardens, over 1,000 communities. They grow all sorts of things. And the community gardens have strengthened the networks. They have strengthened their relationships with their local governments, strengthened their relationships with civil society organizations, and led to all kinds of spin-offs. And so that's my last slide. Sorry. Okay, I'm going to close that. Oops.
Thank you, Thomas. What an outstanding example of grassroots action really delivering on the ground.
Thank you.
Just amazing results. Okay, so can I now ask each of you to think through and share your version of the magic wand? What is the one thing that you would focus on if you could to for us to take forward in an advocacy role? Mary, if I can start with you, what's the one thing in 1 minute that you would like us to share moving forward out of today?
Oh, great, thanks. One key thing that I would want to bring out is the participation of grassroots women needs to actually be given opportunity across a number of forums. Because what is it that has made us so successful in engaging with very little resources, as opposed to being, having the funds to be able to do all these things that we are talking about? One of the key tools we've been able to use for this particular of engagement in the communities that comes out very clearly and can actually be adopted in other forums is the use of the community mapping, the peer-to-peer learning. And again, we have organized ourselves in a way that we are able to use the grassroots academy and congresses to be able to voice issues that would want. So me moving forward, I would want something that grassroots.
I'll expand a little bit on what I was saying earlier. I think it is critical for all voices to be heard. And of course, the voices of communities are quite important and need to be at the center of these conversations, of the discussions of the planning processes. But equally, we need to bring also the perspective of all of different stakeholders in a process that is respectful, that value all the different levels of knowledge, and that facilitates exchange of information in an appropriate way. One thing that I wanted to highlight earlier is how important it is to facilitate that dialogue and ensure that that people are communicating clearly. One challenge that I wanted to highlight that it's important to address is that we found that technical jargon sometimes it needs to be translated into more simple message. That there needs to be enough resources for people to be able to communicate appropriately and come up with the right solutions. And that these are processes that are not fast. These are very, very long-term processes that need to be nurtured, that need to be supported, and that need to be valued. One of the experiences that I brought up has been in the works for 8-9 years, and it has changed and evolved over time, and there has been so many changes and lessons learned for that process. So these are long-term things that need to be supported, and I just wanted to leave it with that.
Thank you. Can I just ask another question back to Jesus? You spoke so eloquently about the need for art over algorithms and to nurture responsible voices. Do you have specific suggestions around how we might do that, particularly in the creation of sustainable cities, both the planning and then the on-ground delivery of that? So as city builders and shapers, what would you recommend?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. I think in the way that we had the Safer Cities Challenge this year, next year we need to go beyond challenging activists and mayors and community people in the community who are already doing the work. And we need to challenge some of these organizations that are really have a grasp on what determines popular culture. Platforms like TikTok and YouTube and Netflix and Amazon Prime, there should be some type of mandate that says that everything isn't just based on the algorithms and what's popular rises to the surface, because that's not always healthy for society and what dictates our social norms, and also for what's created in cinemas. This idea of art over algorithms means that everything shouldn't be profit driven. Films that are made shouldn't be based on how profitable they're going to be, and given more credit to artistic merit to make way for artists like myself to create films like Suicide Saint, which is my next film that I'm producing and directing to address mental health. Mental health is such a huge issue, and in the film industry, it's been demonized and criminalized, and that further creates the stigma in real life when people with illness are, portrayed as villains, and in real life, the reality is they're 10 times more likely to be victims and only attribute to 3% of violent crimes. So there's so many things that in our messaging that we need to, as I was saying earlier, we need to be better stewards of the narratives that we're creating. And to make that happen, we need to challenge the powers and the systems that are in place that have the reins over social media and major media outlets.
Thank you. I look forward to seeing that film.
Thank you.
Okay, we are down to the last couple of minutes, which is a summary of what has been a fascinating 2 hours. Amazing input from such a diverse group of panelists and certainly participants. Some themes that have come through from my perspective. The importance of, I'll just try and distill what is a very, very broad-ranging conversation. The importance of well-planned cities with integrated infrastructure, infrastructure planning, both social and physical infrastructure, absolutely critical. The focus on green and just futures, so the green future in terms of obviously climate change, but also equity and inclusion. Suggestions about radical transparency combined with mechanisms for crowdsourcing solutions. So lots of conversations around the need for bottom-up activity as well as a more structured approach from government. Clearly, lots of thoughts and streamed thoughts about the universal digital access as a fundamental human right, the need to mainstream inclusion in all of our practices. I very much liked the discussion around a new social contract, acknowledging that business and capital need to pay more attention to inclusive, sustainable urbanisation, the importance of the global network of safer cities and the critical nature of youth for our future. Clearly, strong conversations around the need to mobilise grassroots, youth and diverse communities from the bottom up. The importance of learning from experiences worldwide and at local level from all perspectives. The need to institutionalise and formalise the different mechanisms for collaboration. How can we ensure that people are able to participate in planning and democratic processes and governance processes in their cities? Can they be legislated if possible? The importance of messaging in media, as we have heard from Jesus, how art is our sanity, I think is a phrase that will stay with us all after today's discussion. But certainly the importance there of institutionalising partnership mechanisms and the importance of a variety of stakeholders and bringing together all of those thoughts and inputs. And I think the summary of many of the artistic components that we've talked about today is the importance of innovative, creative processes. We all know that vibrant communities are critical, and they're the ones that we all love and enjoy. So how we make sure we capture those processes to also continue to create our vibrant communities. So thank you so much to our amazing panellists today. We started, of course, with Raf Tutz, the Director of the Global Solutions Division from UN Habitat. We had Henry from UN AIDS, Sarita from World Enabled, Edgar from the African Centre for Cities, Greg from the HSBC Future Cities and New Industries Group. We've had Mary from Wynnum Grassroots. We've had Jesus, a film director, a great range of panellists, haven't we? And Susanna from Peru, and then Thomas with those amazing community garden examples from Thailand. So thank you so much to UN Habitat for arranging today, and thank you to our participants who have stayed with us for 2 hours in a fascinating series of discussions. We appreciate your time, your effort, and a huge thank you again to our panellists on behalf of UN Habitat. And thank you all for your time and attention. Have a lovely day and happy World Cities Day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Diane, and
Thank you, Diane. And
have a great weekend. Bye.
Yeah, take care.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you, everybody. Bye. Bye, Lucia. Thank you.
bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
sharing the video, you mute yourself.
Okay.
Just mute yourself.
Johnson donation, getting language about public space into the new urban agenda. And then after doing that successfully, we established the research center here in Stockholm aimed at implementation and especially translating research into practice and policy. And the research is very clear that public space is an essential urban framework for so many of the good things that cities give us, including during times of stress.
I don't think it works well, right?
It may well be that without public space, we really don't have a city at all.
Michael?
Resilience and public space is also, for example, in the work of Eric Kleinenberg on disaster resilience and climate change.
Maya?
Yes, I'm here. I can try and show it from my...
I think Michael dropped off now.
Oh dear.
I think there were too many microphones also on. That is also one of the reasons. Only the person who is speaking, microphone should be on.
Yes.
There were many microphones on.
Yes, we had all our microphones on, that's true. So we need to mute our microphones.
All of you. Now, only the person who is speaking or presenting.
In the future of places, content theory.
Okay, that seems to work. Okay, so I'll run it from this side.
There was a strong echo at the beginning. Was that just somebody who wasn't muted?
No, I hadn't muted myself, but the next time I'm doing it, I'll mute myself.
Ah, okay, that was.
Yeah.
So that's probably the best bet, I suppose. You guys want to just go with that?
I think that works. Yeah.
Can I just try sharing my?
Yeah, please.
1 minute.
Please share.
Yes.
Yeah. I think Maya will have to make you allow you to share.
Yeah, I think you're presenting now, so good to go.
Okay, we have 3 minutes before the start, as I understand, right?
Yes.
Okay, so it's fine. Is it fine?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think I can't see Charles. I tried to call him. I also sent a message, but I don't know. So maybe Milena, you may have to start with somebody else and not with Charles, because I don't see that he's connected.
Yes, I will start with someone else. The first next on the line, and that's Ayanda. So is that okay with you, Ayanda? In case that Charles doesn't.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And if Charles shows up somewhere in the in the middle, I will include him. I will include him then.
Oh, okay.
Maybe he will be just late.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Can you see my screen? Can I stop sharing now?
Yes, you can stop sharing. Yes. Maya, can you allow Aldrin Chandra to come in?
Yes, actually, Leon, I think you might have to do that. Sorry, I was just messaging you to ask if you can add that person, the email address I sent, executive.assistant, that email address. Would you mind adding them as a panelist so they can? Looks like Aldrin should be added now.
Is Aldrin added?
Sure.
Yes, he's added. Good. I think we're still missing Charles though. So, yeah.
All right, thank you, Cecilia. Hi, Aldrin. Can I try to share screen Dr. Bernardia's presentation for a while? For just a few seconds.
Yes, please be quick, because we need to start in a few minutes.
Yeah, Maya needs to give you the rights. Aldrin.
Cecilia, we are looking for Charles Konyango's email address to send a new invite in case that could be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Shall I send it to you in the Teams maybe? Or
Yeah, you can. Yeah.
Okay, I'm doing that. Yes.
My colleague has responded already. It's okay.
Okay, good. And that's fine.
Maguri, do you want to test your screen as well to check you can share your presentation?
Yeah, sure. I can quickly test that.
Yep.
Let me just see.
We just need to make you presenter. 1 sec.
Yeah, sure.
Leon, do you mind doing that?
So would I share my screen or share the presentation, the document, the share file?
I think share screen seems to be better, but I just need to wait 1 second for Leon to give you the thing.
Okay.
Leon, do you mind doing that? Thank you. Okay, great.
Shall we start, or wait a little bit?
Actually, it's 3 now, so.
Because I see we are live, and I see participants are here. So there, if I understand it well, the participants are now actually looking at our test session still.
Okay, so maybe we stop sharing our screen. So should I start?
Yes, please. Yes, please, Cecilia, start. You can just give a cue to me, and then I will introduce the panelists.
Okay, Thank you. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us at this roundtable on building back better communities through public space, and also for the celebration of the World Cities Day, valuing our communities and cities. In the wake of COVID-19 pandemic, public space has emerged as a critical lifeline for many of the cities and their residents. It has proven to be a risk-reducing infrastructure, which is essential, especially in times of crisis. The pandemic has also exposed stark inequalities in the accessibility, quality, and distribution of green and public spaces across our cities and towns. We have seen that local communities have played a key role in contributing to keeping public space safe and maintaining some of the economic activities in those spaces. Policymakers and urban managers need to plan for and with communities to co-create safer, more inclusive and accessible green and public spaces for all. Finally, I would like to extend my thanks in advance to all the speakers who have joined us for this session to celebrate the World Cities Day, and I'm looking forward to the discussions which will come forward. So thank you very much, Milena, and thank you very much to the speakers. We're in your good hands now.
Okay. So thank you so much, Cecilia, for this introduction. Also, big thanks for UN Habitat for inviting me to be the moderator of this roundtable on Build Back Better Communities through Public Space and the World Cities Day. It's been a great honor to be the moderator of this roundtable with so many faces and so many good experts in the field from all around the world. Also, big thanks to our participants for allocating their time to join us and discuss this important topic. My name is Milena Ivkovic, for those who maybe didn't hear it before. I'm an architect, urban planner, public space designer and placemaker, and I'm also director of urban planning advisory teams at ISOCARP, International Society of City and Regional Planners. Before we start with the presentations of our panelists and before we go deeper into the dialogue and the Q&A, let me just explain a little bit of the household rules that we are going to apply. We are really hoping to have as much as possible interactive session. So maybe you have already seen there is a poll at this session. There are 2 polling questions you can answer throughout this whole round table. After the presentations of our panelists and after the dialogue of our panelists, we will be opening the floor for Q&A. And please, if you have any questions, just type it in the chat box, type your question in the chat box, and we will include it in the Q&A session. We will try to curate the best questions from the Q&A session and pose it in the in our Q&A segment. With this small household rules, I would like to invite the first panelist in this round table. But before I do that, I will just go very quickly through all the panelists joining us today at the round table. So we will have Mrs. Bernardia Chandvadevi, the Secretary General of UCLG Asia Pacific in Indonesia. We will have Mrs. Mariana Alegra Escorza, who is the General Coordinator Lima Como Vamos from Peru. We also have Mrs. Mugure Njendu, who is the President of the Architectural Association of Kenya. Then we will have Mr. James Delaney, who is the Chair of the Block by Block Foundation from United Kingdom. Mrs. Ayanda Roji will also join us, who is the initiator and convener of the Africa Center for Public Space from Johannesburg in South Africa. And we will have Dr. Michael McAfee, the director of the Center for the Future of Places of the KTH Rolla Institute of Technology in Stockholm. Again, thank you very much also to all the panelists joining us. I'm really looking forward to exchange the thoughts and ideas and all the best practices you have been working on since the outbreak of the COVID-19 and all the work you have put into building back the trust of public space and building back better communities in these turbulent times. With this message, I would like to invite Mrs. Ayanda Roji from African Center for Public Space to share with us her thoughts and her ideas on how can we leverage the COVID-19 pandemic to create a greener and more inclusive future, and how do we take care that we do not leave anyone behind in these troubling times. Thank you so much. Ayanda, please, the floor is yours.
From the city of Johannesburg, South Africa. I'm also the convener of the Center on African Public Spaces, an initiative that is being set up by the city of Johannesburg in collaboration with other cities in Africa and other universities and NGOs. It's a Pan-African hub for knowledge exchange around public space. I'm going to talk about South African perspective and African perspective in how at this juncture can we rethink and reimagine our context and also the use of public spaces to improve livelihoods in our cities. For those who are less familiar with the South African context, South Africa is a post-apartheid country. This means that cities within South Africa continue to grapple or to wrestle with a twisted spatial inheritance as a result of apartheid, but also colonial policies and everything that comes with that. The image on the screen is the 2019 Times Magazine cover. It shows very clearly or powerfully the realities on the ground, the stark inequalities that persist even today between communities here in the country. Communities in South Africa, as you can see, can live side by side, yet they can live very separate or different lives. And what is central in that is the unequal access to public spaces, particularly green spaces. And I think Cecilia has already mentioned that. Without dwelling much on this, for those who are interested, there's a journal that has been published recently during COVID, because COVID exposed these inequalities. It's called Green Apartheid. So you can just Google Green Apartheid, it will come up and it is free. It really showed that people who need public spaces the most do not have access to it. I think just to say that in Africa, public spaces are used differently and they take different forms. Yes, we have public spaces that are used for relaxation, for recreation, and so forth and so on. But we use public spaces as places to connect us with nature, and in that way they connect us with who we are, where we come from. And so there are spaces for people from different segments of society to connect with ancestors, others to connect with higher beings, others, they use public spaces as places for healing, to grow and collect medicinal plants. And slowly we can see that people are using public spaces as places for sharing intergenerational knowledge. And of course, this variety of use or this variety of activities, it can make public spaces difficult if they are not managed very well. I think that's to mention what you are learning from COVID is that, especially lockdown, it made us realize or made us to appreciate what we have, but at the same time appreciate what we are missing. We missed public spaces a lot. We longed for public spaces because of restrictions. But also we missed buying food from the market or from the mother on the street. So the fresh produce, we missed that. And I think the pandemic made us or raise our awareness or our consciousness in terms of where do we source food and how is the food produced and the whole value chain. But at the same time, it has highlighted the role of informal workers and the role that they play in public spaces and the role that they play in food security. So I think how the question for public space practitioners and cities and so forth and so on is, how do we take this into account? How do we take this role that is so crucial of workers in the way we design and manage public space? Because we've seen that they are so crucial in keeping livelihoods intact. One of the positives that came out of this whole terrible situation in South Africa, for instance, is the fact that there emerged communities wanting to grow their own food, because we saw queues and queues of people lining up for food parcel. So there are a variety of networks in different parts of South Africa, people growing their own food. And we saw cities also being proactive using their park agencies. For instance, city parks in Johannesburg really stretched their mandate and went door to door to sort of disseminate seeds and also saplings for people to grow vegetables, but also to grow fruit trees. So we also saw another network, which is called Sidewalk Food Garden South Africa. It's a network that is emerging from poorer communities, from informal settlements in Northwest, but also from townships, people who want to grow food in their backyards, but also in sidewalks or road veggies. So the issue is, how do we intensify these efforts? How do we integrate urban agriculture? I think that's the issue for public space practitioners as an integral element of our work, because we see that urban agriculture as well as informal workers are so central in keeping the livelihoods intact. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ayanda. This was a wonderful first kickoff presentation to see how important it is to keep on going with public spaces in times of lockdown, and how important public spaces is for everyday life of communities, especially when you pointed out it's their livelihood, but it's also where we all buy food and we try to go on with our lives. Let me introduce the next speaker and the next presenter at our round table, and this is Mrs. Mugure Njendu, the president of Architecture Association of Kenya. Mugure, can you join us?
I think she'll be joining us just in a few minutes. Maybe we can.
Okay, good. Yes, I have just received there are some connection issues. In that case, I would like to jump directly to our next panelist, Dr. Michael McAfee, to hear something from him about what is the teachable moment about this pandemic that is happening. What is the teachable moment in public space? What can we learn? And please, can you share first some of your impressions from the Center for the Future of Places? Thank you.
Glad to. I think there's going to be a little 3-minute video playing.
Excellent.
I think Leon is working on that right now.
In the meantime, while we are working through your film, Michael, I would like to encourage again the participants in this roundtable to post their questions. We have really quite a high number of participants. I already see some of the questions going on through the chat. So that's a very positive development. I'm happy to guide the dialogue afterwards. Okay, so I think we are about to watch the film.
Cosa mi patia presenta lights.
thank you, Michael, for sharing with us this short little video and touching upon what is the teachable moment and how can we move forward. Personally, I like very much that you also already touched down upon the densities and the issue of density and in public space, that it's not some big monster we should be afraid of, but we should really think proactively about it, how to deal with it. Now I would like to invite our speaker from Peru, Mrs. Mariana Alegre Escorza, who is a general coordinator of Lima Como Vamos. I suppose a lot of you know already Lima Como Vamos, who is doing some really interesting work on the city level, on the eye level, and a street level in South America in general, and especially in Peru. Mariana, please, can you share with us your screen and your ideas? Do we have Mariana online?
Maybe she's also having problems connecting, so maybe we can move on and come back to her later.
Okay,
Sorry about that.
That's a pity, because I wanted to ask a big, nice question about the role of streets as public spaces in the pandemic times to her. So nevertheless, I will continue with the next speaker. And next speaker is Mrs. Bernardia Chandvadevi, as Secretary General of the UCLG Asia Pacific. So please, Bernardia, can you share with us your thoughts in very specific way? What do we need to put in place to ensure sustainable collaborations between different stakeholders?
Yes. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Greetings from UCLG ASPAC Secretariat at the City Hall of Jakarta, Indonesia. It's really an honor for me to be speaking here and celebrating together this World Cities Day. Let's also congratulate everyone for making a good progress or good works related to improvement of our cities, to make our cities much more vibrant, greener, cleaner, as well as healthy and prosperous one. So we know in this difficult time, one thing we should not forget, of course, we are really blessed. And of course, this COVID has brought a lot of miseries to millions of people. And let me focusing on this public space, especially on this public transport as well. We need that. We know that COVID-19 changed the way we live, the way also people move around, and people also get scared taking a public transport or mass transit, MRT or LRT or whatever mass rapid transit gives. So I think it's very important that we should bring back trust to the people from the government, and also change make this public transport adapted to the new normal by applying this distancing protocols, operating at less crowded capacity, and cleaning and disinfecting vehicles as facilities. But what we see some changes here is that we see more people prefer to take cycling as well as walking, and turn this hobby into alternative modes of transportation. So, but our cities are not designed so much, especially in Asia, to accommodate this increase of demand for pedestrian walkways and bicycle lanes. So therefore, this is a turning point actually for many mayors and decision makers, whether we want to invest in pedestrian walkways and bicycle lanes, that cars in our, and also then cars in our public spaces, our public streets. And also we see some kind of progress already, like Jakarta announced a plan to make a big shift from bike lanes to permanent ones, and also Manila as well. So we also know that this COVID-19 is hitting the cultural life of our communities very severely. Public libraries, memorial, community center, museum, all are closing. So, but we see a lot of initiatives here, because during this crisis, we also see that many of them turn into online kind of or virtual, sharing and and also create a more meaningful in sharing these experiences. So I say here is that public space can be a good catalyst of inclusivity. This is an example how we work with Surabaya and also Surakarta when we run this public space program with the support of UN Habitat. Like Indonesia has put the people participation in planning. However, people participate in designing, developing public spaces has been very limited. So this is also from the first time that community from different groups, women and youth and professional volunteer joined the process from planning, designing, developing, and also resulted in the increase of ownerships on the space among the community. So and let me also conclude here by saying that now the COVID really changed the way. We cannot go back again to the times before the COVID happened. So what are we now trying to introduce is this combination of virtual as well as these physical kind of platforms or public space. This is one example how we connect a marketplace, making digital marketplace and connecting this traditional markets and put this online. This is actually very convenient because and this is also benefiting women groups because most of these come from the small medium enterprises. And when we look at the percentage, only less than 10% of the small medium enterprises, I'm talking about the Indonesian case, have been connected to the platform of or digital platform. This is also one we are working on it, and then the other one also about the changing the public space, physical public space that we developed earlier in Surabaya into space where the people can also collect the information and also use as an education center. So this kind of combination we see as quite prominent here because then we also see that there is a kind of a significant role that public space can be as a vital to build back better, faster, and greener. So let me conclude here. Public space can play a significant role in promoting sustainable development in the cities. Also, public space can initiate certain activities that will improve the city's capacity in responding to the future challenges. And I think what we need is how can we redesign our cities and make better plans so that this people can live more comfortably as a part of recovery plan. So therefore, it's very clear that public space is a concrete infrastructure. This is also has been shown by several best practices that can bring together various stakeholders to be involved and promote equality. So thank you. I think this is what I can share, but we will be happy to answer any questions if there is. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Bernardia, so much for this very useful presentation, very inspiring presentation. I think one of the nice moments we saw, it's actually how city can innovate even in the times of uncertainty like the COVID pandemic. I hope that we will get a lot of questions about that as well. Okay, to give the word to everyone at the panel, I would like now to move to Mr. Charles Konyongo, who is the Director of the Urban Development at the State Department of Housing and Urban Development of Kenya. Please, Mr. Konyongo, can you join us and share some of your thoughts and ideas and examples of an innovative, low-cost and high-impact public spaces related to the experiences of Kenya? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Milena, and the other team of the panelists. I want to start by saying that public spaces are very important elements within the urban fabric, and much more looked at from the perspective that in Africa, the rate of urbanization is now quite high. Africa is one of the rapidly urbanizing continents, and people are moving from the rural areas now into the urban areas and being faced with the shocks of a concrete of a jungle. And so it's very, very important that we provide public spaces that are functional, because in rural areas there is lots of space where communities can come together in various community activities, and also in terms of connectedness, in terms of community cohesion. All those opportunities are available in the rural areas, but within the urban areas, the opportunities are not available. And so it's very important that we think about what is the architecture, of public spaces, and much more within the new phenomenon that we are faced with of the COVID pandemic. It's very important that we look at the structure and the culture of the people that are moving into the urban areas, and we rethink about the architecture of the public spaces within the urban areas, so that we make the public spaces that are accessible to people, which are comfortable, and which takes cognizance of the various cultural backgrounds of these people. And we ensure that the architecture of the new public spaces is such that it brings about inclusivity. Now, in terms of a policy, it's very important that we take cognizance of the fact that there is widespread public disillusion and about failures to produce public spaces that can produce connectedness and can achieve cohesion among the communities within the urban areas. So in terms of policy, it is therefore important that in Africa, then we begin to screen all public spaces for their longer term implications, and trying to prioritize actions which then would combine benefits for communities and reduce inequality with implications for longer term resilience among the new and emerging urban communities. So that is very important, and it's important that we strategize on priorities which then can be quickly implemented through public participation. It's important that we keep it simple, we make them accessible, and we ensure that we highlight much more on the character of the communities that would be accessing these public spaces. That is very important. And so that requires that we plan the public spaces with the people instead of planning for the people or developing them for the people, so that we are able to develop trust and confidence of the users of these public spaces. I want to give an example. I shared my screen, and I don't know if I'm able to move it to slide number 9, because that's then the screen that I wanted to share. Let me just see if that counts. Yes, on slide number 9. Yes, I'm sorry, I've skipped it. Slide number 9, on my slide 8, there it is. Now, I want to give an example of an innovative low-cost, high-impact public space. This is in a project that we are handling in Nairobi City, in a place called Korokocho. Korokocho is one of the sprawling slums within Nairobi. And there are 3 critical attributes of the kind of public spaces that we are creating. First of all, it is a community initiative. And it is the public spaces that we are creating along one of the rivers that dissect Nairobi, called the Nairobi River. Now, this public space, or this space, we are doing it together with the community, and the objective is to reinforce social cohesion and community participation, and also to prevent insecurity and violence, and to ensure that the communities are participating in terms of designing of the public spaces in a manner that would then create social cohesion. What is happening is that there was a lot of crime within the Korokocho slums, and particularly because of the slum nature, roads were not there to enable people to access their residential areas and the working places. And so you'd find that most of the roads were running alongside the riparian area of Nairobi River. These places were very insecure, particularly for ladies and for the youth as well. And so what happened is that we brought together the youth that have been rehabilitated from different kinds of crimes, from drugs and from thuggery and those kind of from alcohol. And we brought these communities together to create the public spaces, some of which are there on my screen. You can be able to see them. But what happened is that the developments along the Nairobi River were facing, the developments turned their back to the river. And that is one of the things that then created a lot of insecurity. So if you are walking along the river, then the development, you are walking at the back of the development. And so one of the things was turning the development then to face the river and then creating a buffer, a green space as a buffer between the river and the development, and then ensuring that there are walkways, there are parks for people to engage, for children to play, for evening outdoor and for weekend outdoor activities. That is that is what the communities then did decide. So how then does it work? The riding principle is from gangs to gardens. Korokocho area then, in terms of developing the green space, was to ensure that the youth shun crime so that they are able to create the gardens. Now, in that regard then, we did move on to, first of all, ensure that we bring the communities together, and you can see that on my screen. So that is just the youth groups that have been brought together. They are being sensitized on the importance of creating their own parks, which then would be very useful for them. And they were supposed to then identify the various designated areas which then this could be done in. And as you can see in this in the picture just down there, they are creating these parks by themselves. So those are part of the before, how the area looked like. It was a dumping area, but then on the right, then you can see they are turning the wastelands into public spaces. Now you can then see that is the one that finally has. This area used to be a dumping site just by the river. Now it's a very nice walkway for them during the weekends, and of course for wellness. You can see there young people now are bonding together on the picture on the right, and then the picture on the left, and then on the right, children are celebrating a birthday party for one of their own. So what then I'm saying in short is that we then this program has been able to create connectedness. It has been able to create cohesion. It has been able to turn youth from crime and belonging to gangs into people then that are doing something that is productive, and which then turns into meaningful livelihood. So for now, I think that's what I wanted to share. Thank you very much, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Charles. This was a really wonderful, wonderful presentation to see and to really grasp the power of communities and the power of transformation of public space, the impact it can have on the better lives of the communities, despite the COVID times we are in. I particularly like the moment, the elements of the green that were transformed in this particular area. We will get back to you all, dear panelists, at the end of this round, because I see a lot of questions pouring in right now. The more we get deeper into this dialogue, the more different examples and standpoints we present, the more questions we get. I'm very happy to see the chat box right now. I would like now to switch further to our guest Muguyo Njendu, who is the president of Architectural Association of Kenya, and to ask how can we actually leverage the COVID pandemic to create a greener and more inclusive future. We have just seen a great example from Kenya. Can you give us some of the impressions from your side?
Thank you so much, Milena. And if you'll allow me, I'll just share my screen briefly so that I can also just maybe do a small sort of introduction into, for those who may not know who the Architectural Association of Kenya is and what we do. And really, I think for me, I'll be speaking more from the voice of the public sector per se. Sorry, of the private sector per se, because I don't know if you can see my screen okay? You can see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
All right, fantastic. So maybe just to give you a bit of background in terms of the audience that is here today is just to talk about who the Architectural Association of Kenya is and what perhaps as a representative of an association, how we fit into this conversation in terms of building back better communities through public space. So the AAK is really an association of built and natural environment professionals. So we incorporate architects, we incorporate engineers, town planners, we incorporate landscape architects, quantity surveyors, construction project managers. So we're really sort of an umbrella association that brings together professionals in Kenya, whether it is in private or public sector, as well as national county governments, and really also private sector and academia. We act as a link across the board in terms of these professionals. I'll also speak just a little bit about how, as an association, we went ahead and responded to COVID-19. And I'm hoping that my screen will allow me to move along, but even if it doesn't, that's fine. I'll speak a little bit about it. From the AAK side, we felt that we had a responsibility as built environment professionals to respond to COVID-19 and the pandemic. What we did in that case is really to focus on providing guidelines and recommendations that would be able to benefit the general public, those who are fighting the pandemic from the perspective of the health sector, and also kind of look about long-term strategies across the board. We put together what we call a rapid response task force, and we put together what's called the proposed guidelines on planning and design of COVID-19 quarantine and treatment centers and long-term infrastructural interventions. However, within this, we also kind of looked at the urban impact of COVID-19 and what we could learn from this pandemic in terms of a pandemic being fundamentally very anti-urban. It undermines our basic ideas of community and in particular urban life. And we looked at the sort of short-term interventions to do with this. And one of the things that came out very strongly is this idea of ensuring we pedestrianize our streets, but really how important it is in the face of a pandemic to transform our public spaces and to make the spaces more accessible and create and reclamation of new spaces. So I won't be able to share my screen, but I'm happy to continue with the presentation. So with regards to this, we have seen various gestures, both from the government initiatives, public sector, private sector. We've seen, I think Mr. Konyango before me has highlighted some really strong examples, but also another example, for example, of Mishuki Memorial Park, which in terms of the sort of a cleanup that was needed to make sure that that space was transformed into a public space, has had such a great impact on our community. In private sector, we've seen organizations such like Kilimani Project Foundation that currently have an ongoing challenge called the Kili Plan Challenge, where they're actually looking at the public, sort of transforming public spaces and looking at equity and social inclusion in those spaces, as well as environmental sustainability. I do want to state that inclusivity has been a challenge across the board in terms of how to of public spaces being inclusive in Kenya, and not just in vulnerable communities across the board, no matter what economic background anyone comes from. We really do tend to have green or recreational spaces or public spaces being spaces that you have to pay or engage in an activity in, a paid activity to be able to access. So there is a lot of work that we have to do both as public and private sector to get us to the point where we have more inclusive public spaces. I want to speak just from the private sector perspective, really about how what our responsibility is and how we can greater participate as the private sector. And really, it's around this sort of collaborative approach in government as well as the private sector in terms of providing initiatives that will help private sector actually want to make inclusive decisions towards ensuring public spaces within their developments. And there are two levels: is the policy level as well as the project level. And the policy level is really providing incentives that encourage private sector to invest in public sector projects. and sort of inclusive projects. And then on the project level is really looking at the way we can provide sort of clear strategies around projects that we implement that have a provision for public spaces. Milena, I'll leave it there and then I'll answer your question moving forward.
Thank you so much, Mugure, and thank you for being able to distill all the important aspects, even if you didn't have always the support of the vision of the streets in public space. How do you deal with this within your organization, and what are the lessons and good examples from Lima, from Peru? Please go ahead.
Thank you, and very glad to be here. I hope you can hear me well. Here in Lima and here in Peru, as you may have heard in the news, we have been hit very, very hard with the COVID-19 pandemic, and we have lost a lot of lives, and still as a society and as a government trying to actually gather what we should be doing next. And that's why public space becomes so important, and let me share with you some of these slides so you can actually get to know better our city. So this is Lima, this is Miraflores, which is like the tourist area and the nice where the nice pics photos are taken when you visit. But the inequality that we live in is quite big, and you can actually see it, and it's tangible in the public space, in the buildings, and in the way of living of people. So the problem is that we can not being able to stay home in the conditions are not the good conditions for the majority. So how can we stay home in the midst of a pandemic where we do not have either a home or either the basic public services to be there? And also, as we are driving through the pandemics and the economy was reopening, because it is also a very important situation to being able to have money to eat and to buy groceries, we need to realize that the ability of the streets to provide opportunities for people and the characteristics of streets to actually being the heart of the society forever, but in particularly in pandemic times, is even more valuable than ever. So that's how a policy that will prevent people to not take the street in the better way, with of course all the safety measures, is actually doing worse than good. And as we have these highly rates of death, of people being dead and lots of problems, then we have government not being able to manage how people are organizing in the public spaces, which are proved to be the most safe ones. So here, for example, it's now a big conversations to start closing the beaches as we are approaching to the summer season, which is going to be starting in 2 months. So now, today, for example, you can find police and military people in the beaches of the city of Lima to prevent people to go in and to just enjoy the sand or the water, or even making some sports. So this is a contradiction in between how we are conceiving the public space as a vector of transmission, which is not, and how can we actually take the public space to reactivate and to promote the idea of community, but also to be able to provide opportunities to people. So what we are asking for, and we are being happily having some meetings with high-level government public officers, is that we need a national plan for public spaces for taking care of the emergency and to actually be on board for a long time, as the public space is being used in a more intensive and in a more diverse way than ever. And it will be also a key point to actually mitigate the pain not caused by the pandemic itself, by the sickness, but by the economical problems that it has bring to, of course, the most vulnerable people. So we have started working in some strategies that we have been sharing with different local governments and staff to actually keep open streets and to have some guidelines for the use of public spaces in the context of pandemic. So being able to redistribute the public space, to give more space of streets to public transit and to bikes, and to open and widen the sidewalks are some of the examples, but also the ability to use the street for commercial focus, which is quite very important, and the policies are more to take them out and to prosecute them instead of giving the people opportunities to actually work. So it's in that context that we start working with a project from Ocupa tu Calle, which is our flagship program on public spaces called Occupy Your Street. And it's called Reinicia tu Barrio, which is Restart Your Hood, to actually trying to bring people together in order to put together their values and their vulnerabilities, but also to take advantage of all the space that is available, either it's public, private, common, or even if it's not even realized as a public space. So the street is here the main character of the program. And we have been doing it in several areas of the city, of course in more virtual and also field work together. But this is our proposal for Peru, and to actually have this national plan of public spaces and to be able to distribute the space within the people in the ways that we need them now to actually be able to cope the pandemic and to start the recovery. Well, that's it, and I'm here for any question, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mariana. Thank you so much for this beautiful presentation. And again, I see the importance of streets and streets as public space coming back to the discourse, not only as important for public life, but also important from the views of inclusion and how can we actually secure the continuation of income for the vulnerable communities in the city. Okay, I would like now to speed up a little bit, unfortunately, because as you always know, there is so many things to discuss and there are so many nice topics after these presentations. So I will give the word to Mr. James Delaney, who is going to have a very interesting presentation about tools for the communities and the community engagement. That's something that we have been hearing very often this afternoon. Please, James, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I hope you can hear me now. Yeah, thank you for the invitation to this, for your interesting talks. I'm the chairman of a foundation called Block by Block, and we're a non-profit that use the computer game Minecraft as a participatory design tool. We really primarily operate in the global south, and for us, digital tools such as Minecraft offer a really unique opportunity for an inclusive, accessible co-design process, which I think is more important now than ever in the COVID situation. Yeah, I think this is such an enormous topic to grapple with. In terms of what we can put in place to ensure collaborations between civil society, the scientific community, city leaders, and so on, I think, firstly, we need to take an interdisciplinary approach. This is not a problem that any one group in these various fields can solve. And I think having the right kind of communication between particularly the scientific community and urban designers and policymakers is absolutely essential. I think also building on that point, we have to be wary that solutions such as big data are not really the entire solution. Particularly in the global north, companies like Google and Apple are collecting enormous amounts of data, which are being used to inform public policy on public space. And whilst these are useful to collect sort of macro regional trends, which works well at a high level, this big data often overlooks the more day-to-day occurrences in the public sphere. And I think it's so crucial that we, in studying public space during COVID and lockdown, that we get the perspective from the lived experience, from people's stories, and not just relying on that big data to make our decisions. I think building on this as well, we must remain vigilant of infringements of civil liberties in relation to public agenda for a long time now, but there is growing concern that mass surveillance, militarization of public space, privatization of public space is really posing a serious threat to public spaces around the world. And during lockdown, we've only really seen this increase. It's a challenging concept, but in many of the cases where countries have delivered the most effective COVID response, such as South Korea and China, these are some of the most surveilled countries in the world. South Korea has probably had one of the best responses to lockdown, but it also has the highest ratio of CCTV to its population, and we must you know, the freedom we have over our public space and making sure that our civil liberties are not being infringed upon in that way. And I think, furthermore, this has been mentioned a few times, but we really need to include marginalized groups in the decision-making processes around a public space. COVID has really emphasized how important public spaces are to the health and well-being of city citizens, but it's also highlighted the huge inequality in access to good quality public space. And we still have so much to do in the inclusion of all sectors of society in how public spaces are designed. Social distancing and lockdowns have made it even more difficult for marginalized groups to have some say or participate in decision-making processes. And this is where digital tools and non-physical means must seriously be considered as alternatives to solve these problems. And then I think finally, it's also worth mentioning that whatever is discussed here today is likely to maybe in a short space of time. It's really an evolving situation and perhaps too early to make some sort of solid speculations on what a post-COVID city could look like. If you think about the aftermath of 9/11, a lot of people were suggesting that we would see huge de-urbanization. No one would want to. Having said that, there are obviously instances where previous pandemics and diseases made significant changes to sort of modernist planning policies and the way in which our public spaces are thought of. But yeah, that's all I have to share, and I look forward to discussing with the other panelists.
Yes, thank you, James. Thank you so much for your presentation and for lining out, pointing out how actually important digital tools are. On one side, what are the beauty of digital tools? How can they be deployed to get more inclusivity of communities in a planning process? And also, it's nice to hear that you kind of give us a warning. What is the other side of the technology? Being maybe the private space has been already congested with all kind of surveillances. So we have to think about that as well. I'm keeping eye on the clock. We are having another half an hour for our discussion and for our Q&A. I will suggest we just start first with one big question, actually 2 big questions I have for all the panelists on the roundtable we have heard today, and then move into several questions from the chat. There are quite a lot of questions from the chat box, so I will distill and curate some of them. But let's start first with the question to all the panelists, and that question is, what do you think the post-COVID city might look like? Or how do you think the COVID-20 city might look like? Because I think what we are facing right now, the challenges we see, they're going to stay with us for a longer time. The health challenges, the pandemic challenges. I'm not sure if I can really, point out people, but maybe James, we can start with you, and then I would like to move to Bernardia and Charles with the same question. Just give us a short reflection of that.
Sure. I think, as I said in my presentation, it's very difficult to predict what it will look like in an ongoing situation. I think to understand that better, we need to really be studying what is happening in public spaces now. And Gale Architects have done some really interesting research on cities in Denmark, where they've been analyzing use of public space pre, during, and now, perhaps not now post-lockdown, but you understand. And I think understanding how differently people are using public spaces now, it's been interesting to see a lot of cases where use of public spaces increased. The rates in which strangers are talking to each other and interacting has increased. There's been an increased use of public space by vulnerable people. So children and old people are now using public spaces more frequently in some of these cities. And although there are dangers, as I said, of using big data to understand this, I think we just have to do as much as we can to understand what is happening in our cities now to make our kind of assumptions and predictions of what a post-COVID city might look like.
Thank you, James. I will switch to Bernardia right now with the same question from her point of view, from the point of view of UCLG. What do you think the post-COVID city might look like? What do you think the post-COVID Jakarta or the post-COVID Indonesian cities could look like? What are the models of stakeholder collaborations on a policy level in this in this future?
Yes. We know this COVID-19 really brought a misery, but what we learn here, the pandemic cannot bring down the fundamental value of humanity. I think it's very clear from this pandemic that solidarity has been seen very clearly, especially in urban areas. And, this is the place where normally in urban areas, people live individualism, but in this situation they created also a kind of solidarity spirit by looking at also your neighborhoods. I think this is the kind of things that we will see changes of the humanism, especially in cities, from these social aspects. But for these physical looks, I think cities and local governments, they consider also the importance of looking at again the streets as a place for the people. I think this is very clearly seen because everything in the end, is about political will, what the leaders want to put and whether this is something that the people really want. And this also changed the way leaders see, and also they started also rethink how the cities look like. And of course, I already mentioned earlier, we really need to make better plans for the cities. And as I saw you in the slides, that we also work in the informal settlements, like the kampung I mentioned in Surabaya is actually one of the kampung informal settlement in Surabaya. So, but I think we really think it's very important that we combine this digitalization because we are really pushed towards that. So the markets will be cleaner, will also be well managed, and have a combination of digital markets as well. So people will have easy access to get a supply of goods, and also to because this supply chain has been affected a lot during the COVID. So I think a combination of easy these digital markets and also physical markets can be also seen as a crucial aspect and make people easy to live. So that's, I think, what I can say.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bernardia. I would like to move now to Charles with the same question. How do you see the post-COVID city and the post-COVID development of informal settlements? And I would like to add color to that and ask you, what do you think we should really leave behind, the practices we should not repeat anymore in when we are talking about slum upgrades? Charles, are you still with us? Okay, let me see if someone else can pose the answer to this question about the post-COVID city, how it might look like. Michael, you have your hand raised in a very traditional manner. Just raise your hand.
Thank you.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. I think we have a choice here. We could go in one of two different directions, and one of those would be to hide away from the virus and from public space and continue to encapsulate ourselves in cars and in buildings and let the public spaces decline, which would be a terrible thing. And that's a practice that I think we should leave behind. I think we have an opportunity, as we do in all pandemics and all crises, to innovate and to adapt and come up with new approaches and new ways of thinking about how public space can work better in the post-COVID age. So I'm actually on the optimistic side of that question, but I think that's the challenge before us.
Thank you, Michael. What do you think Mugure could be then in this context of post-COVID city? What could be even better done on the relationship between helping real estate sector to invest more in public space?
Thank you so much, Milena, for that question. When I was thinking through, really about the private sector responsibility in terms of ensuring inclusive and available and accessible public spaces, I came across actually a quote by a former UN Habitat director, which said that what defines a character of a city is its public space, not its private space. But what defines the value of the private assets of the space are not the assets by themselves, but the common assets. So the value of public good affects the value of the private good. And I think that really has to be the focus for us as the private sector, is that we need to show that a valuable public space is an asset to a city, an asset to a private developer, a private asset as well. And maybe just if I can also speak to your question about what the post-COVID city might look like. And we're already seeing it in Nairobi, where we are seeing that there's now sort of all these good plans that we had for the city of Nairobi that have been in existence for a while. COVID-19 has provided an opportunity for implementation of those plans, because it has now become an immediate crisis, where we had plans from the 1980s in terms of addressing non-motorized transport, addressing BRT, and it's never been implemented. And we say sometimes that we have really good plans in Kenya, but the problem is implementation. We have actually been provided with an opportunity to implement, and we're happy to see that that's happening, whether it's in the Nairobi County, where we're seeing more an increase of bike lane paths and cycling paths being introduced, and pedestrianization of city streets. So that's what we really see in terms of the future of the post-COVID cities.
Thank you. I would let me pose the same question more or less to Ayanda as well. I know that Ayanda is not being able to share her video right now, but she can share her audio. Ayanda, what do you think from the South African perspective, and especially from the initiatives that you're leading now on some kind of African Center for Public Space? What do you think this new city, or better said, these new communities post-COVID could look like?
Thank you so much. I think I'm an optimist, but at the same time, having worked in municipalities, if only we could reflect, and not go on as if there's nothing that has happened to us. So there's a lot that can happen. And again, like in Indonesia and South Africa, we see the emergence of broad-based movements, a network of community groups coming together, helping communities. on how to survive the pandemic, meaning that they focus on water, sanitation, and waste. But there's a lot that we could gain in that, in terms of really achieving the inclusive agenda that we talk about. So that's number one. At the same time, we saw a lot of our central government working closely with local government in planning together to tackle the pandemic. So meaning that this whole integrated planning, cross-sectoral planning that we've been talking about is something that that can be done. But at the same time, COVID has also exposed ways in which, as local governments, we are still missing key parts of our constituencies, people like migrants and so forth and so forth, meaning that we are forced now to collaborate with NGOs in terms of or dealing with that. So the question is, how can we leverage on this solidarity? How can we leverage on this working together of different spheres of government, really to tackle the wicked and also the difficult issues we grappling with, issues like inequality and so forth and so forth. The last one is the fact that we see park agencies like Johannesburg City Parks and Zoo reinventing themselves in terms of skills, but also in terms of competence. Because in parks, we've got skills like horticulturalists, we've got skills like landscape architects. They are doing beyond beautification. They want to play a role in terms of urban agriculture, but also in terms of making sure that our cities are resilient and also healthy. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Yanda. This was again a very clear statement about the role of the solidarity, and solidarity as a phenomenon we really have to take further into the COVID-19 post and COVID-20 city, let's say, to build a more resilient communities. I know that there are a lot of roadblocks to this solidarity. And that's also something that comes very clearly in our chat box right now. There is a lot of questions to our panelists about how to actually deal with informality and how to help realize public spaces within informal communities when they're outside of the, let's say, planning framework. Mariana, can you maybe give already some of your reflections to this question we have in the chat box, and that is how to actually implement all these ideas in this post-COVID recovery in the informal communities? Is there a model that we can include it better in regular planning procedures?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. I will answer a little bit of the other one too, please, which is that I think that the normalcy that we were used to before the COVID has also quite big failure. And as an example, I guess we were really used to ride a bus and be really crowded, and that's also was not normal and shouldn't be. So now that we need to have a distance, then we can actually be having a better way of looking through better strategies to actually be living the city in a more normal way, which is also a more better way for everyone. So in the terms of the different informal settlements, so the cities right now are at they are, right? That's the state of the situation. It's not that we're going to wipe them and then rebuild them and then have this beautiful utopic compact city appear from nowhere. So but we do have space. We have a space which is being poorly used, or it's being overused by some other actors like cars or so, and we can actually redistribute it. So it is not about the ability of having a lot of money and start building new streets and new sidewalks, which also, of course, we need to, especially in the areas that there are none. But we still have the space to actually make the changes, and we can take the local economies, like the micro economy, not the economy from the commercial centers, nor the economy from the big financial areas. It's the economy of the people selling some food in the streets. It's the economy of people actually working and selling whatever they have made with their own hands. So that economy should be exposed and should be very, very aware and evident in the public space, with, of course, not only healthy restrictions, but also organizing and managing them in a good way, so the negative emissions will not be affecting all, but all can be enjoying the good emissions and the good consequences of having the streets being used by people. With that in mind, we need to put together the society and citizens with the government, with the national government too, with the companies, with anyone that is willing to actually relive the place they are living in a better place for all of them. So if you want healthy businesses, then you'll need healthy cities. If you want healthy people, you'll need people that will be able to use the spaces and the public spaces and have a decent house. So we can start through that. The professor David Harvey says that from recessions we could come out by making the war or by making the urbanization. So as anyone, and none of us want to make war, but we want to make urbanization. We should ask for a really, really human urbanization and not replying the models that our former normality was saying were the good ones, which are not. So thank you.
Thank you, Mariana. These are really good points that we should take to the post-COVID city. And of course, it's not easy to deal with issues of informality and formality. And at Isocarp, we had recently the training course on that for Indonesia, how to actually better include informal settlements into the formal processes, so they can get their voice, but they can also get the legitimacy. That's something that could be a good thing we need to take further away when we recover from the pandemic. I have two interesting questions in the chat box, which I would like to play to Michael, together with his view on the post-COVID city and what can we better leave behind and take along. Those two questions is about what are the processes through which public spaces evolve, and what is the role of placemaking in general to help all these ideas and let's say roadblocks to be lifted into when it comes to creation of better and more inclusive public spaces. So, Michael, if you can give some kind of overhaul and a wrap up of the session, please.
I'm glad to, and I'm delighted to be part of this conversation. What strikes me in listening to everyone and reading the questions is how great it is to have this global conversation, to be talking, across continents and across many different conditions and challenges, and to be sharing these lessons. And I think that's what we've got to do. And so I'll get to your question, but I'll sort of do it as part of this wrap up that I guess we're going to need to get done pretty quick here. I think we're all recognizing that there is a enormous value in public spaces, that if there's any lesson from this pandemic, it's got to be that how much we miss public space when we can't go out into it, right? And how much it creates value in our communities. And that's been touched on by all the speakers to some degree: the economic values, the social values, the ecological values, the climate adaptation and climate mitigation, the low carbon lifestyles that we're going to need to be living, which are going to be critically in public space. So that's absolutely crucial. But there are challenges. And as the questioner asked, what is the implementation process? And I think part of that is the whole question of how we share knowledge and how we share tools using digital resources. And that was another point that came up, the whole question of the rise of digital platforms. And, they could threaten public space. They could replace public space. There's been a discussion about, well, we won't need public space because we'll all be on Zoom. And I think we all know we don't want to do that for the rest of our lives. On the other hand, how can this technology support the creation of public space and creation of better quality urbanization around the benefits that public spaces give us? How can it empower informal settlements and the residents of informal settlements with digital tools, not just to sort of, create top-down interventions from above, but to empower them, to give them capacities to deal with their challenges. And that's one of the things I think is so great about Block by Block, is that it's one of those kid-friendly tools. And by the way, my grandson was telling me once when I was going to a Block by Block session, he said, "What? You're going to work and you get to play Minecraft?" He couldn't believe that I get to do that. But so it's very accessible and very appealing to lots of marginalized communities and children and the elderly and low-income populations. We've got to empower those people. We've got to provide the access to them. And I think that's something that also came up many times, is that there's growing exclusion from public space, including now during the pandemic. How are we going to be able to make public space more inclusive? How are we going to deal with inequality, this enormous problem that is surging in so many cities and countries around the world today? And I don't think anybody believes that public space by itself is going to address that challenge. But without public space, without the ability of people to mix and to interact and to have opportunities and so on, how are we ever going to deal with the challenges of inequality? So I think public space is fundamental to that as well. I mentioned before, there's the danger, I think, of reinforcing some of our worst habits, of whether it's encapsulating ourselves in cars and houses and so on, but also allowing vehicles and machinery and the big systems, the public or the private systems, to dominate the public realm. And that's a theme that I've heard over and over here today. On the other hand, the pandemic has given us a really interesting opportunity, I think, to create temporary interventions like the street, reclaiming the streets and making linear parks and so on, that can then become permanent, because people who might be resistant to a permanent change made at the start can see the desirability and the benefits, really, of these interventions, and they can gradually become more permanent. We can have more pedestrian spaces on streets and not so much widening for cars everywhere you turn around, which only increases demand, induced demand, and so on. And then finally, I think there's this whole question of how we change the, if you will, the operating systems of how we're doing things today. The New Urban Agenda has been described as a new paradigm for planning. And I think pandemics, in an interesting way, open up some opportunities, some important opportunities for how we can make these interventions and share interventions with one another, not necessarily identical, because obviously they've got to be adapted. And someone asked about how do you make public space safe in a very hot climate. And I showed the example of the misters that could be adapted to individual spaces in the public realm. Those are the lessons that we need to adapt. We need to take those broader lessons and adapt them specifically to local context. And then someone else commented about, is public space an infrastructure as such? And I certainly think it is. I think it's maybe the fundamental infrastructure on which all the other infrastructures have to align. If you think about streets and so on, and that's where all the other infrastructures of the cities align. And so, yes, I think we need to we need to elevate our understanding of the importance of public space, and we need to, I think, raise our game in sharing knowledge and sharing tools with one another about how to not only take the lessons of this period, the pandemic, but also the broader lessons that we're dealing with right now of challenges like climate change and inequality and all the other things, and really raise our game and build a new generation of better cities. So that's a good ending point, I think.
Yes, thank you, Michael, for trying to sum up not only the discussion coming from the roundtable, but also the vivid discussion coming from the chat box. It's very difficult to put it all together in a way, but I think we made a great effort. We are nearing the end of the roundtable. I would really like to keep it within the margins we have of the time on the time we have. But I'm so happy that so many questions and so many good ideas have been put forward today. First of all, a big thanks to all the panelists. And I suppose a lot of our participants here today at the roundtable are quite curious, what are the next steps to this? Do we just leave it like this and then try to organize some other table or not? I can tell you that both UN Habitat and ISOCARP will work very hard together to give a kind of succession to this. And I know that all your questions in the chat box are not going to be forgotten. There will be a short report about this session from UN Habitat, which I suppose will be placed on the website of UN Habitat and all other channels of UN Habitat. So with these words, I would like just to go back to Cecilia for a very short closure. Cecilia started this session, so please let's hear it from Cecilia once again. And thank you so much for participating.
Yes. No, thank you very much. And I think it has been such a pleasure. And just like Milena was saying, there's a wealth of questions that have come up in the chat box. And we would actually like to keep contact with all of you who have joined this session, like Milena was saying. And I understand that we have your emails. So we will share the presentations. We will share a report from the session. And I think just like Milena was saying, this is just one in a series of different sessions that we'll be organizing. I think ISOCARP is organizing a session in, is it in November?
Yes, we are organizing sessions on the topic of public space, but also other topics such as climate change and planning for the post-oil city throughout November, December, and January. So stay tuned. There will be a lot of similar talks and roundtables with international experts in these topics.
Yeah. Exactly. And please do send your email if you are interested in being included in this network of let's call it public space enthusiasts, because we'd be very happy to keep everybody informed of all these sessions and events that are ongoing. And I'd like to say thank you to the speakers. It's been a pleasure to have you all join us today. Really valuable inputs, and I'm really sorry sometimes the technology takes over, but and we miss this about being able to meet personally. But I think it would be really nice if we can. We will try and keep all this together with the speakers, with the participants that have joined, and continue this discussion on the importance of public space in sort of our post-COVID recovery. And thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the World Cities Day.
Yes, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the World Cities Day, and I hope to see you soon again joined with this topic. Thank you.